We are going to be the primary beneficiaries of a project that's threatening the health, safety, and livelihood and just the general sense of home.
Tonight, a day of action to call attention to what will be lost with the damming of the Churchill River at Muskrat Falls.
I hope whatever they see down around here, they will keep it and pass it on.
Getting back on the land at a university like no other. And after a record number of nominations, APTN News and APTN Investigates take home multiple journalism awards. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Muskrat Falls land protectors and supporters joined forces in Ottawa today. They attempted to make their way into the House of Commons. Annette Francis has the story.
The Muskrat Falls rally started 3 blocks away from Parliament Hill at the Human Rights Monument. Following a few speeches, they started their march with signs in hand.
I'm wondering if the Labrador land protectors who are here would like to come up with me and we're going to dial the Prime Minister.
After stopping at the Prime Minister's office briefly, they made their way onto Parliament Hill, where they were met by Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, Yvonne Jones. Despite the fact that construction continues on the $12.7 billion hydro project, they're voicing their concerns. Angus Anderson of Nain, Labrador, brought bottles of water from Muskrat Falls and made a special offering to Jones.
The moment Mr. Harper and Mr. Trudeau approved federal loans to Muskrat Falls project, it was the very moment that Parliament, all the MPs have agreed to poison Labradorians.
Among the protesters are elders Jim Learning, Eldred Davis, and Marjorie Flowers, who all spent 10 days in jail last summer for peaceful acts of land protection.
And we depend on that river to stay safe and clean. And my people in Riglet have been living that way for thousands of years and depend on that. This is no joke. This is not something that we bought off by $9.2 billion or any other federal loan guarantees that you might have up your sleeve. This is important. This is deathly. This is beyond words.
According to Yvonne Jones, it's important everyone have a say.
And as you know, right now, there is a lot of dissension in terms of the views and perspectives of where those recommendations need to go, both from the Innu Nation and from the other Indigenous groups. So we will be engaging with all of them, but I think you know that the process is in place, is the process you guys asked for, and the recommendations that are there have to be gone through.
Following their brief words with the parliamentary secretaries, the group made their way up the steps of Parliament, where they were met by the RCMP.
All I want to do is put these pictures of the people that will be affected, my people, my Inuit people in Labrador, in Central Labrador, on the desks of those politicians, because they are in support of destroying me and my great niece. She's 2.
They were warned they'd be arrested if they stepped off the curb, and in unison they all followed suit, stepped off the curb and were detained. They have since been released by the police and banned from Parliament Hill for 90 days. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Another Muskrat Solidarity event was held in Halifax, where Nova Scotians are set to receive at least 20% of the power from Muskrat Falls. APTN's Justin Brake reports.
We cannot continue to sacrifice Indigenous communities for our needs down in the south.
These demonstrators have a message for the Nova Scotia government, Provincial Energy Utility Emera, and all Nova Scotians. Organizer Chris White of Solidarity Halifax says the energy slated to come from Muskrat Falls is neither clean nor green.
We are going to be the primary beneficiaries of a project that's threatening the health, safety, and livelihood and just the general sense of home of people who don't even really need this project.
Amid an occupation of the Muskrat Falls project site in 2016, Newfoundland Premier Dwight Ball and Labrador's Indigenous leaders agreed to the demands of land protectors, who called for an independent study of the methylmercury they said would contaminate their traditional foods. Last month, the committee that reviewed the methylmercury issue delivered its report to the province.
In Nova Scotia, I think we have a moral obligation to call on Emera and the provincial government to pressure their counterparts in Newfoundland and Labrador to meet the demands of the people who stand to lose from Muskrat Falls.
Like, I think in those situations you listen to the people that are being affected, and then whatever it is that they say, you try and find out where you fit in. And I think that's what the Mi'kmaq people here in Nova Scotia have to do, and the public at large. Solidarity!
APTN reached out to the province and Emera for comment, but neither responded by deadline. The Independent Expert Advisory Committee tasked with reviewing the methylmercury issue on Muskrat Falls has recommended the removal of soil from the reservoir, something that land protectors and scientists have been recommending all along. Now it's up to the government of Newfoundland and Labrador and Crown Corporation Nalcor Energy to decide whether protecting the lives and safety, health and well-being of Indigenous communities downstream is worth the additional costs. Justin Brake, APTN National News, Halifax.
And we did receive a statement from Emera after deadline saying Emera supports the government of Newfoundland and Labrador's efforts to engage and work with local and Indigenous communities regarding their concerns, including the methylmercury issue. Land-based education is becoming more recognized by Canadian universities. For students in the North, being able to get a degree while staying close to home and their own culture is a win-win. Our reporter Charlotte Mort-Jacobs spent some time in the bush getting to know the students of one Northwest Territories program.
Oh, it's so cute. It's not your average Western classroom, but it is just a regular semester at the Shinta Bush University. From splitting wood to pulling nets, each student learns from the land. For nearly a decade, the Shinta has taught traditional skills found in the Northwest Territories. Located in the bush 100 kilometers east of Yellowknife and only accessible by plane or snowmobile, these students eat and sleep on the land. Thumley Drybones Folio is returning for her second semester.
I'm enjoying it a lot. I find there's a lot of challenges for myself to spend time on the land unless I'm taking myself, but I don't really have the right equipment to do it.
Her task today is to plan out a game for students based on bush economy.
Everyone needs to make a fire, and there is a prize to be won at the end. So, like, okay, go make a fire. And I want to know if people are going to make individual fires or one big fire.
As she works on her social experiment, Savannah Lance prepares dry meat, a traditional practice she did not learn until the Shinta.
I'm being able to teach my younger cousins these kinds of things because it's not always an option for a lot of people, even though like you might live in a community. So it's a pretty powerful feeling to know that you can teach other people what you're learning, like as well as just knowing these things for future generations and my children in the future. So
both Lance and Drybones Folio attended university down south and felt isolated from their culture. At Deshinta, the students learn from university professors, elders, and bush experts. Elder Berna Martin teaches the students the proper way of filleting fish.
We're sort of like a family, and we have tent close together. As I remember when I was growing up, we used to have tent together like this, and I hope whatever they see down around here, they will keep it and pass it on.
Students earn a minor in Indigenous Studies from universities such as U of A, UBC, and McGill, and do bookwork in Indigenous law, self-government, and more close by in an eco-lodge during breakup season.
It's been a personal goal of mine for my community project to figure out how to, like what traditional beauty practices are, and like, just as we noticed today, I mean, I've been cutting meat up pretty much all morning, and my hands have never been so soft. I was just talking earlier about how you can use blood and meat for facials. So,
the students graduate in June. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Blatchford Lake.
What a great program. Well, there is an important court date this week for the proposed 60 Scoop settlement. Details on that and more after the break. Here's a look at Tuesday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. Plenty of sun, 18 in Fredericton. Not so lucky a little to the north, rain-snow mix and +8 for Happy Valley, Goose Bay. A sunny +10 in Sept-Îles, +4 under the sun in Chibougamau. In southern Ontario, sun's out and 20 above in Windsor and Peterborough. To northern Ontario, plus 13 in Thunder Bay and Sioux Lookout, 11 in Kapuskasing. Snow and 0 in Churchill, 11 in Thompson. 13 in Barons River, 19 under the sun in Winnipeg. A cloudy and rainy day in parts of Saskatchewan, 18 in Swift Current and Yorkton. Rain and 11 in Stony Rapids, 10 above in Uranium City. Welcome back. 60 Scoop survivors who were adopted out to non-Indigenous families are in the middle of a fight for justice. The federal government has proposed a $750 million settlement, plus $50 million for a new Indigenous Healing Foundation, but it's not a done deal yet. APTN's Brittany Hobson joins us now. Brittany, thanks for being here. There's an important court date for the 60 Scoop settlement this Thursday and Friday in Saskatoon. What's going to be taking place?
So as we know, we have this proposed $800 million settlement for 60 Scoop survivors that was announced last fall. But it now is in its kind of final stages. It has to go through the courts to get approved. So there's going to be 2 hearings. The first one is in Saskatoon. That's happening this Thursday and Friday. Essentially, it's a place where people who are opposing the settlement can come and have their voices heard. So they can go there in person. They can tell the judge there, why they don't want this settlement approved, why it's not fair. We have heard of people that are going to be rallying in front of the courthouse before the proceedings. It's a 2-day proceedings. So they are wanting to make their voices heard, essentially. And then we have our final one in Toronto at the end of the month.
And for those who are unaware, you mentioned that not everyone thinks this is a fair deal. Why is that the case?
So we've heard, particularly here in Manitoba, I've done a few stories with some groups that are saying that the money, it's not enough. So it is $800 million. Part of the settlement does see $75 million going to 4 separate law groups, and a lot of people are upset about these lawyers, essentially, what some have been saying are profiting off of these stories. So money has certainly been a concern. Some of the survivors, could see $20,000 to $50,000. It's really just dependent on how many claimants come forward. That's been a big issue. There's certain things about, not being able to go with further lawsuits after that. I mean, you're essentially signing away your right to further sue the government. So that's been a major concern as well.
So what is the process for those who are opposed to the proposed settlement?
So what it has been since the settlement was released in the beginning of January is people were directed to a website, which is the 60scoopsettlement.info, which has all the information laid out. People, if they want to oppose it, they had to fill out a form and send it in, and those would be forwarded off to the courts during these hearings, or these settlement hearings that we're going to be going into. What ended up happening, though, and we've just learned about this recently, is that they were getting provided misinformation. So when they were calling in to speak with representatives, just looking for information, they were told that if they wanted to oppose it, they'd essentially be giving up their right to money, when that is not the case. If the settlement does go through and people oppose it beforehand, they are still entitled to that money, or they can opt out. So this has left a lot of people confused. There was a deadline of April 30th if you wanted to oppose. What came out this past weekend, though, was some information that this small group, is what we've heard or been told, was given misinformation. So they've extended that deadline, so you can still go to this website, 60scoopsettlement.info. You can fill out the form and send it in by May 10th, so that's this Thursday. Otherwise, you can show up in court in Saskatoon, or they're doing video conferencing. They have places set up at various courthouses in the major cities across Canada. Those are all listed on the website. You can go and you can give a video testimony, or not testimony per se, but talk about why you don't want this settlement to go through.
And Brittany, I understand you'll be heading to Saskatoon to cover these hearings. We'll look forward to your reporting from there, and appreciate you bringing us up to speed here.
Thank you.
A conservative think tank believes Northern BC First Nations must jump on the liquefied natural gas bandwagon. Over the weekend, the Macdonald Laurier Institute released a report. It advises that those First Nations can benefit from the next boom in LNG development. Its author is Ken Coates. He joins us from Toronto via Skype. Mr. Coates, appreciate you taking some time to join us. Why is now the time for First Nations in northern BC to partner with liquefied natural gas developments?
I think it's the time, in part, largely because it's the time First Nations people have decided for themselves. It's not because the economy wants it. It's not because the government of Canada wants it. It's because we at least have a number of First Nations who want to explore the possibilities. So they're open to the idea, willing to consider it, and looking to see if, in fact, they can create a place for themselves in what could be a very dynamic industry.
You report that in 2016-17, First Nations received just over $60 million from benefit agreements in natural gas. What does that say about the potential scale of these developments?
Well, it's interesting because that number suggests only a very small percentage of what's possible. And I don't want to be one who says we should rush after the money. This is not Las Vegas. What it is an opportunity for First Nations to take very careful consideration of the opportunities. There are some liabilities, questions of environment, for example. But remember that in northern British Columbia, and in fact in many parts of Indigenous communities across the country, there are not very many other opportunities on offer. You know, if you do not find an accommodation with the resource sector, there's nobody else lined up to create jobs, to create opportunities, to bring money into the community themselves. So in the absence of any other alternatives, carefully done oil and gas development could actually be very beneficial.
The $36 billion Pacific Northwest Petronas LNG project met strong opposition and was ultimately canceled. How can First Nations partner effectively amidst such widespread opposition to some of these energy projects?
That's a really interesting question, of course, because First Nations find themselves on both sides of the issue, don't they? And you have one group of First Nations in favor of development, looking for the kind of opportunities that might occur. Other First Nations who are very concerned about them for other reasons. I think we also mix together the liquefied natural gas possibilities with the ones relating to the bitumen transfer from Alberta. We have First Nations on the prairies, for example. There's 130 who are involved in extracting oil and gas from reserve lands. We have groups like the Haisla outside of Kitimat, British Columbia, who are very engaged in resource development and oil and gas development. What the main issue here is that these processes cannot be forced. They have to be done at a time when First Nations are prepared to go. But the other thing that First Nations have learned is that window of opportunity may not be open forever. That, in fact, one of the things they've discovered with the Petronas project is that companies walked away. They haven't walked away from natural gas. They haven't walked away from LNG. They've just taken their billions of dollars and gone somewhere else. And there's other countries elsewhere who are looking at that same capacity, and they're looking at the same need to provide LNG for their long-term benefit. And so I think what happens is we're getting to the situation where First Nations are being cautious and careful, but also being realistic and saying, in the absence of other alternatives, how do we get the money to be free from government? How do we get the money to sort of support our own economic, social programs, our housing programs, our cultural programs? How do we get independent? How do we create that autonomy that's the essence of self-government and the essence of sovereignty? So I think there's a willingness on the part of more First Nations to actually look at what could be an opening and burgeoning industry that could provide jobs and could provide opportunity. We thought it was off the table a year ago. It's coming back on. The BC government has realized they have to sort of push some sort of resource development to keep the provincial economy going. They're open to the possibilities, and some First Nations are as well.
You lay out several steps for First Nations to engage in the LNG sector. What would you say is the most important?
The most important is to have really careful local consultations before you jump in. One of the things you've seen happen in the past is that perhaps a chief in the council, perhaps an economic development organization will get really excited about the possibility, and they'll start negotiations with a company and with government, and they'll get 50 yards down the 150-yard race, and you'll find themselves then finding out that the community has concerns and in fact is going to oppose the project. I think it's really important for the communities to discuss this very carefully, to get good advice on and realistic advice on what are the jobs, what are the economic benefits, what are the potential consequences, and then decide whether they want to go further. You can take the whole community with you. You can't do this with 5 or 6 or 10 people doing it by themselves. And I think that's the most important lesson we've learned over the last little while.
Mr. Coates, we'll have to leave it there, but we appreciate you taking some time for us today.
Anytime. Thank you.
APTN National News and APTN Investigates received some major recognition over the weekend. After the break, we'll take a look at some of the stories being honored. Here's the rest of Tuesday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. 12 under the sun in High Level. Cloudy and 24 in Medicine Hat and Lethbridge. Over on the west coast, rain and 20 in Victoria, 16 and rain in Tofino. Rain as well in Sandspit and a high of 10. A sunny 19 in Prince George. In Yukon, 17 in Dawson City, high of just +1 in Rock River. Over to NWT, 12 in Fort Simpson and Wrigley, +5 in Ray Lakes. The temps dip below 0 in Sax Harbor at -12, -10 in Polituck. In Nunavut, -8 in Baker Lake and Repulse Bay. -13 under the sun in Clyde River. -11 in Joe Haven. Welcome back. It was a huge weekend for APTN National News and APTN Investigates. The annual Canadian Association of Journalism Awards Gala was held in Toronto on Saturday. APTN had a record 9 nominations this year and walked away with a number of awards. APTN National News and Investigates took home 4 awards at the CAJs. Kathleen Martins, Holly Moore, and Paul Barnsley won the Open Broadcast category for their work on truth or reconciliation. The piece took a second look at the compensation process set up for residential school survivors and revealed most of the compensation money bypassed survivors, concluding that justice had not been served. Kenneth Jackson won the Daily Excellence Award for his investigative work, linking the deaths of 3 First Nations girls who were in care. Kenneth's investigation revealed gaps in the child welfare system and provided answers for the families when officials would not. APTN investigative reporter Cullen Crozier picked up another win for his documentary, Against Their Will. The story revealed how Indigenous women were sterilized without their consent in Saskatchewan. It took home the award for human rights reporting, and our Thunder Bay video journalist Willow Fiddler received the CAJ Award for Emerging Indigenous Journalist. Willow's work has included covering the inquest into the deaths of 7 youth in Thunder Bay, a series on youth who must leave their families and communities behind to attend high school in Thunder Bay, and the murder of Barbara Kentner. For more on these stories, go to our website, aptnnews.ca. Huge congrats to all the winners and nominees and the whole team in front and behind the cameras who work so hard to bring your stories to light. And one of those stories is up next. Holly Moore has a deeper look at the national inquiry on APTN Investigates in just a few minutes. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.